This book was really conceived out of not my, well, I started with my dissertation, no, because my dissertation is on humor studies, but my area is really American literature. Right after my dissertation, Dr. Hemino Abad, who was in my panel, I remember it so clearly, said, like after this, you go into Filipino humor because nobody's really working on it, no, and thus began my engagement, with the areas that I noted, I talked about in the paper. So my entry into popular culture began, hence the title, National Humor in Philippine Popular Cultural Forms, because in Philippine culture, the repository of our humor is really in popular culture more than in high literature. So that was the beginning of this project. I noted two. One, which I also addressed in the introduction of the book, is that humor is not a proper study for scholarly discussion, and only very recently has it become so, because and I think especially in the Philippines, it really is rather trivialized. It is seen as more a topic for entertainment that passes. The irony of this is that the reality of humor is that it's a very serious study to understand what our culture is. The idea also is that the stereotype is that Filipinos are fun-loving, they are always smiling, but we have very little material, very very scarce resources, on the more scholarly, academic, cultural aspects of this humor. So that's one. And the second, I think, is that anybody studying humor, or any artifact that delves on humor, is that, or the study of humor itself is going to be enjoyable throughout, that it's going to be entertaining throughout. And no, what it is like hard slog. It's as valid an area of study as like anthropology or the sciences or sociology. So it's that. I think those are the two most common points. Yeah, one is that I think the first goal when I embarked on this, and when I embarked on this, obviously, I mean, they were disparate studies, that came out into this one package here. But one is to really just start a conversation about Filipino humor, right? And I think, if at all, when I conceptualized the book, it's that throughout the years, when I embarked on this study, I saw the need to provide an initial resource for the examination of Filipino humor, right? And what it means to us, to understand this in terms of our culture, who we are, to look at culture not as static. We're always smiling, we're always funny, but that this is humor that changes, this is functional, this depends on who we are evolving as a people. Did I achieve this goal? I hope so. Buy it. so I know that I've achieved it. I just hope that this is useful to the people. Okay, two lang. I have like two stories, like which to me is an eye opener. One is like it's a fangirl story, because in that, I'm really happy that in the course of writing the articles for this for this book, I ended up connecting with, like the very creators of this comic materials. So to be able to write to the cartoonists, for example, we're not exactly friends, but at least like to be, yeah, it's an honor, to be able to write to this. To write to and to write about these people. So to be able to exchange material, if only to ask, may I get permission to use these materials? So that's one that to me one I mean, everybody has been very accommodating. Pol Medina, Jess Abrera, you have certainly Dino Ignacio, who created Maritess, versus the Superfriends. All of them very kind to give permission. It's Hugo Yonson, who became the what's this? The copyright owner, right? Of Kenkoy was also very kind. Also, the other story, which to me is gratifying, and which underscored for me, personally and academically, underscored and emphasized the need for a book like this, is that over this, over a period of many years, a number of years, I would get like students, who would, from different universities, not just UP students, who would approach me, asking about their thesis, asking about their studies, and asking me, do you have a book, that we can use, And at the time, I always said, well, it's with the UP Press, and now it's out. But I saw at the time, like, how necessary a resource this was. So there's more that's needed, but I'm glad that this came out. Right, I think like there are a lot, but I think initially the classical theories of humor, right, which I started with. First, the difference between humor and comedy. Comedy is a genre, is a type, and humor is a sensibility. And many times they just interchange the two. And then the idea, as I was saying, of if at all people are unfamiliar with it, it's to understand that humor has been theorized, and that there are ways by which we look at the nature of humor. So very simply, it's that the more classical, the more what do you call this? There are certain ways, by which theorists have already looked at the nature of humor. One is to look at humor as being born of incongruity. We laugh because we see something that is unexpected. It is abnormal, and therefore we do a double take, and that, like that recognition of that unexpectedness pushes us to laugh, or it becomes the impetus to laughter. The second is to look at laughter as being born of superiority. We laugh at people, we laugh at other people, we do things, we do have gestures, we have words, right, that put other people down. Right? And in the course of that, we feel superior over them, or we laugh because Hobbes talked about it, a sudden glory. We look at the circumstances of others, and then we realize that, well, at least I'm not like that. So it's that superiority that makes that disparity that makes us laugh. And then the third is that laughter is a release. We usually have this nervous laughter when we talk about taboo things like sex, or things that are, that we really don't talk about in real life or in ordinary life, like fecal matter or urine. I mean, even just like talking about it, makes us titter a bit. So that idea of release or relief, that laughter is not so much cognitive. It's not that we think about it, but it is a release of emotion. So it's that, you know. So this particular classical theories are explored in the book very profoundly. What you know? I find this this question very difficult because what question do you wish someone would have asked you about your book? It's not so much like why did you write it, but why didn't you write it sooner? Actually, there are a lot of other questions that need to be answered, but it's really that you know, why didn't something like this come out sooner? Yeah, because I think like for not just for humor scholars like myself, no, and I was saying earlier, you start seeing a number of people, you know, in the academe, you know, undergraduates, graduate people, who are starting. You know, there's a great upsurge, you know, in the interest in humor. I've seen students write about humor in advertising. They start to write about humor in television shows. A number of my colleagues have started to write about humor in literature. So I know, you know, like in the field of psychology in the Philippines, somebody has began to make inroads in this. The problem with this, as I met with, no, as a scholar of humor studies myself, is that material is hard to look for, right? And if at all, you know, like there is material, you have to claw to look for it. So it really is that. So I started by treating that question, why didn't you write it sooner? Why didn't it come out sooner? As, you know, a rather ridiculous question. But if somebody else wrote this, I probably would ask that, you know, I wish I had this, you know, but I'm really just grateful it came out. Number one, I think it's really just the appreciation of material. There's so much that I've not been able to cover here. And just like looking forward to a lot of people who have expertise in so many areas that I don't have, you know, who, I mean, I hope, you know, will be inspired by looking at the gaps, you know. They read this and they think, no, but I have an idea about this in film also. I want to have an idea about this in the Filipino duplo, in many areas like that. So I think it's on the one hand, like the material itself. Number two, it's perhaps like to it's in the hope that they get inspired to study humor itself, no, and to look at this. I started talking about certain concepts in humor, right? And if at all, you know, like the book inspires people to look more into the study of humor, to look at the operations of it, right? Then I would have been. I would have been successful in sparking that interest. I entered the study by way of popular culture, as these are vehicles in and through which Filipino humor most widely and most readily appear, where humor is seen mainly and primarily as entertainment. And in Philippine life, the apparent triviality of studying the humorous coincides with the triviality with which these ephemeral popular cultural forms are branded. This is another reason why these texts need to be rescued, not just from the stereotypes about popular culture of which Soledad Reyes speaks. These 9 essays use the emerging scholarship of humor studies and the many approaches it employs to discuss the humorous. In these essays, the question may well have begun with, what does the Filipino laugh at? But it is the answers to why does the Filipino laugh which makes this a significant new study, because we find at many points that Filipino humor affirms a poignant negotiation between an often hostile national terrain. And this book uses the term Halakhak in its title. I use this expressly to denote not just innocent laughter, tawa, katatawanan, but the loud, raucous, boisterous, belly-busting laughter that accompanies the deep enjoyment or realization of the ludicrous and the ridiculous, as much as it is dark laughter that signals bitter irony, scorn, or even ire. Halakhak appears to work with this much desired, much vaunted Filipino trait, quote, our ability to laugh at ourselves, end of quote. Leon Maria Guerrero, in his essay, What Are Filipinos Like?, avers that this is what saves us, quote, a lively sense of the ridiculous that has helped us keep alive our sense of proportion, end of quote. I would like to think that the multiple meanings of halakhak that I examined in these popular cultural forms now rescue this Filipino laughter from the inanity or the oversimplification of this friendliness or good-naturedness, and give this laughter more conscious and enlightened interpretations. So that's my first teaser. I'd like to finish off with a quotation from the section, from the chapter that I wrote about Dolphy, right? The king of Philippine comedy. Right? And the title is The King of Philippine Comedy, Some Notes on Dolphy, and the Functions of Philippine Cinematic Humor as Discourse. Of the many essays here, I feel that Dolphy deserves this particular paean, no? This particular praise. In this last section on page 104 and following, right? The section made to make people laugh. The perennial question of why Dolphy remains, quote-unquote, king of Philippine comedy may be answered by citing the value of his comedy as enjoyable pastime, using humor as a way to forget the misery, literally. To forget misery, literally. More significantly, though, comedy is seen to vanquish misery figuratively, where misery is binarily opposed to mirth, by creating comic heroes who triumph within the ordinary by subscribing to an ideology that underscores domestic values. Filipino humor in the Dolphy comedies, therefore, superscribe the ultimate coherence/cohesiveness of the individual within community, even though such an individual starts off as an absurd, ridiculous, unacceptable entity, which is the source of these comedies. That the comic heroes which Dolphy portrays triumph by propounding accepted Filipino values guaranteed to smooth over difficulties brought about by inequality, oppression, diminution, and powerlessness is the core of these characters and their inscription within the context of Philippine society and culture. What Dolphy has achieved by way of his characters, his gags, his nonconformity to narrative logic, is the creation of liberative spaces for his characters and for the viewers who identify with him, using humor both as aggression and as subversion, so that while eliciting laughter against the individual and institutional bodies of authority, he showcases himself too as possible success over the marginalization he experiences due to this. His comic characters create disruptive gaps, making it possible for the viewer to be lifted away from his miserable status. And so, in the end, the king, this is on page 109, the king, quote unquote, is subject to the same complexity his audience faces. His negotiation of the problematic aspects of laughter he evokes within Philippine cinema is subject fraught with questions. His status as meaning maker made tenuous by his complicity with the machinery that created his popularity. Our project here is to negotiate the discourse of Dolphy as comic artist and not just as media icon. And while we have tracked the potentials and the dangers of his contribution to cinematic humor in the Philippine context, we end with the acknowledgement that no one in recent Philippine cinema/media history can approximate his career chronology, his comic contributions, or can approach the extent of his body of work enough for this to be studied at length. For the moment, then, Dolphy still reigns. And that's the end of the excerpt.